Erev Tov, good evening to everyone who is joining us to this year's not Sefer Shabbaton, Scholar in Residence, but to the Sefer Scholar in Residence via Zoom. A lot of asterisks. The tractate Shkalim in the Talmud Yerushalmi, Jerusalem Talmud, teaches that the righteous require no monuments. Their deeds are their remembrance. But sometimes monuments and deeds converge. It was 60 years ago that the president of the Jacksonville Jewish Center at the time presided over the dedication of a new synagogue library whose name honored the memory of a recently deceased spiritual leader. Writing in the Center Yearbook back in 1960, president of the synagogue reflected, "It is incumbent upon our congregation to keep alive the memory of Rabbi Tofield by incorporating into our lives the love of Torah, which was so deeply embedded in his life." Congregation's dedication of the Tofield Memorial Library will be a lasting reminder to us of his zeal for learning and his zest for teaching. The man who wrote those words was Judge Louis Safer. Together with his beloved wife, Marilyn, the Safers were devoted to the welfare of this community in myriad ways. And they were particularly passionate about the cause of religious education for Jews of all ages, their children, and adult learning in particular. In establishing the Marilyn and Louis Safer Scholar in Residence Fund, Judge and Mrs. Safer's children, Elliot, Cynthia, Dina, and Shauna of blessed memory, along with their spouses, have provided underwriting for an annual Shabbaton that perpetuates the ideals so near and dear to their parents. Each year, the income from this endowment, along with the support of various benefactors, supporters, and patrons, enable us to invite renowned scholars and distinguished educators to Jacksonville and to expose the Jewish community to a wealth of Jewish learning at no charge for the programs. And so, in an echo of words written 6 decades ago, it is incumbent upon our congregation to keep alive the memory of the Marilyn and Louis Safer Shabbaton, incorporating into our lives their love of Torah, which was so deeply embedded in them. Over the years, our Sefer Shabbaton has brought an outstanding menu of scholars to our community, including Joseph Telushkin, Lawrence Kushner, Yitz Greenberg, David Golinkin, David Wolpe, Ron Wolfson, Jeffrey Salkin, Danny Gordis, Susanna Herschel, Judy Klitzner, and many others, including our scholar this year. Now let me introduce our scholar in not residence for this year, who will be joining us both tonight, Sunday evening, and Monday evening, all at 7:30 p.m. A native of the Garden State, Rabbi Daniel Nevins was graduated from Harvard University with a BA magna cum laude in history, and he went on to earn a master's in Jewish studies from the Jewish Theological Seminary, where he was also ordained as a rabbi in 1994. Upon ordination, Rabbi Nevins served as the rabbi of Adat Shalom Synagogue in Farmington Hills, Michigan, for 13 years. There, he was also a founding board member of the Frankel Jewish Academy and a faculty member at Hillel Day School. A past president of the Michigan region of the Rabbinical Assembly, the Farmington Area Interfaith Association, and the Michigan Board of Rabbis. He was also awarded the Reverend James Lyons Dove Award by the Dove Institute for his leadership in interfaith understanding. which included taking a group of Protestant and Catholic leaders on a trip that included Pope Benedict XVI first public audience, the observance of Holocaust Memorial Day at Titus's Arch in Rome, and a week spent in Israel. From 2007 until the present, he has served as the Pearl Resnick Dean of the Division of Religious Leadership at the Jewish Theological Seminary, encompassing the Rabbinical School, the H.L. Miller Cantorial School, and the Center for Pastoral Education. Next month, Rabbi Nevins will embark upon a new chapter in his career as he becomes head of school at Golda Ach Academy in West Orange, New Jersey, where he will dedicate himself to supporting the faculty and students at this K through 12th grade institution of Jewish learning. Rabbi Nevins has played an active role in shaping Jewish law as understood and practiced by the conservative movement in his many years of serving on the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards of the Rabbinical Assembly, and his prolific authorship of various landmark responsa. Among the many important topics he has treated with equal parts erudition, compassion, and thoroughness include the ways in which blind individuals may participate in the Torah service, the issue of mamzerut in the contemporary Jewish community, halachic criteria for the determination of death, the use of electricity on Shabbat, gene editing, lab-grown meat and its status for kashrut, and artificial intelligence. Together with Rabbis Elliot Dorff and Avram Israel Reisner, he authored the responsum on homosexuality, human dignity, and halacha, which opened the door to the acceptance of LGBT students at JTS and the halachic permissibility of same-sex marriage. In addition to his responsa on topics of contemporary halacha, Rabbi Nevins is the author of myriad essays, prayers, and Torah commentaries, many of which can be viewed on his website, rabbinevins.com. An active member of his Jewish community, he enjoys, whenever possible, biking, hiking, canoeing, photography in the woods, mountains, and lakes. Lives with his wife, Lynn, a talented potter on Manhattan's Upper West Side. And I am very pleased to have been Rabbi Nevins' classmate at JTS and to be ordained with him in the very same ceremony on the very same day, and looking forward to watching him receive his honorary doctorate on June 6th of this year. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce Rabbi Daniel Nevins.
Thank you so very much, Rabbi Jonathan Lubliner, for that very warm introduction. I too look forward to witnessing you as you receive your Doctor of Divinity on June 6th at Surprise, the very same ceremony. So I hope your congregants will also join us by live stream. I think it should be on the JTS live stream page, and you can watch the proceedings. And I'm also delighted to see Susan here. It's been too long. And also Rabbi Shira Rosenblum. And Rabbi Rosenblum, we miss you up at JTS, but I hear you're doing amazing work. And it looks like you're making challah or something like that. It's a very small picture, but so thank you for the invitation to be with you tonight. Obviously, I wish that I could be with you in person, but Zoom is not great for everything, but it's pretty good for some of these sessions. And so I hope that that we'll be able to make use of this platform. And after all, our topic for the first of these three sessions is going to be about digital life and Judaism, religious life in the digital age. And I imagine that topic has associations for you in many different ways. Some of you might be thinking to how you study Torah in a digital age. Some of you might be thinking not only to video study, but the use of email and podcasts and many other platforms that we use to access information today, many of which are really quite fantastic and are much broader than what we had access to not too long ago. Also, you might be thinking about the way you gather as a family. Some of you may have celebrated Passover Seder's this year. And while it was sad not to have all of the family around the table, perhaps you had an expanded list of guests, people that you wouldn't normally have at your Seder, maybe who live in a different part of the country or in a different country altogether. And so when we think about religious life in a digital period, I think we can all agree that there are some benefits, but there are also some costs. There are ways in which it just doesn't feel the same. Maybe this is not an issue in Jacksonville, but in colder climates, getting a minyan to synagogue on a February evening, can be a bit of a challenge. People don't necessarily want to go driving on the icy roads, but many minyans have actually exploded and really had much larger participation. Some synagogues, and I don't know if this is true for Jacksonville, but have found themselves attracting people from other countries and frankly other cultures. I've heard reports from some of my colleagues in synagogues who have people from South Korea or Japan who are coming to their services just to sort of see what the Jews are up to, because up until now, they really didn't have direct access to our prayer, but many are interested. And so for all of us, I think that the digital era is something that we see the blessings. But as Rabbi Lubliner mentioned, I've been on the law committee, the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards, for many years. And actually, he was also on the law committee for many years. And I still assign his responsum on exercise on Shabbat to students. I just did it about 2 weeks ago, Jonathan. But in my time working on that committee, one of my projects from about 10 years ago was about the use of electricity and electronics on Shabbat. And I noted that on the one hand, the work that we do when we turn on a computer or phone is not the same as the work that we do when we chop wood and burn it in a fireplace. True. On the other hand, the rules of Shabbat were very much about localism, about getting people to sort of not go journeying, but to be at home, and not to be out farming, but to be enjoying Shabbat, not to be working with their bodies, but to be celebrating with their community and with their minds engaged. And some of those distinctions remain true in our day as well. So I tried in 2012 to navigate between our desire to expand people's participation in Shabbat, sometimes by using electricity, but on the other hand, to maintain a sense of the distinction. Another paper that was written even earlier than mine, back 20 years ago, was by Rabbi Avram Israel Reisner, which he called, as he likes to do with humorous titles, Wired to the Kadosh Baruch Hu. And already 20 years ago, he was asking the question of whether you could constitute a minyan online or by phone. And at the time, he felt that the answer was clearly no, that you needed to have 10 Jews physically located in the same place. However, you could then extend that minyan and include other people by phone. And I remember Roger Lemus is on this call too, a former congregant of mine in Michigan. I remember an early Shiva minyan that we had in a house where one of the children of the deceased had a flu and was in bed with a high fever and could not come to the Shiva, but was able with a speakerphone to listen to the service and to say Kaddish together with their siblings. And I remember at the time, this is before the Reisner Tshuva, feeling this makes perfect sense. We've got a minyan, it's intact, and now this other person is sort of jumping in and adding on. So that has been sort of the status quo. But what happened at the beginning of COVID was that when it was no longer just inconvenient for people to come to synagogue, but actually forbidden by health authorities, where synagogues like the Jacksonville Jewish Center suddenly had to do the unthinkable and cancel in-person services and quickly switch to new platforms like Zoom or Google Meet or FaceTime or things like that, or Facebook Live, in order to access services. Immediately the questions became, is this real? Can we really make a minyan this way? And those questions were what we would call halachic questions. They were questions of permission or prohibition. Rabbi, are we allowed to do this? Are we allowed to make a minyan online? Of course, in the conservative movement anyway, most synagogues, not all, but most synagogues found some way to accommodate this need, and actually haven't really studied with Rabbi Lubliner all of what you've done, but have found some way, whether it is by having a small in-person service which is then projected out, or having a fully online service, or having no online service, but only having Friday night until sunset, and then Saturday night for Havdalah. I've seen all of those examples this year. But beyond the question of are you allowed to do something, then the question became, how do you do it? And can you do it well? Do we allow people to chat with each other when that seems to be a type of writing? Do we allow people who are on Zoom to have an aliyah to the Torah, which they're not near the Torah, for example? So these are some of the questions that came up. So I guess there were the primary level questions. Is this permitted at all? There are the secondary level questions. If it's permitted, which things specifically are permitted? And then there's like a third level, tertiary questions, which are, how do you do it well? How do you have to mute everybody? The answer is yes, of course, but you have to mute everybody in order to be able to sing and to be able to participate fully, to hear the service. How do you deal with lighting? How do you tell people to dress? Should people dress for synagogue or should they be in their pajamas? And that's okay. I'm sure you've dealt with all those issues as you've tried to create new norms. And so all of that is part of religious life in the digital age. So what we're going to do tonight is I'm going to screen share a little bit with you. I've put together a nice PowerPoint presentation. And then I'm going to ask Rabbi Lubliner to break you up into little breakout groups and to take some time to look at the texts that I'll be showing you. And then we'll come back together and we'll discuss the texts. These are ancient texts, but I'm going to be asking you whether you think they're relevant to today. So for now, let me screen share for just a moment. So this is me, and this is you. And so we're going to just go forward a bit. So these are some of the halachic issues I've mentioned. Can you make a minyan without physical proximity? If so, with what stipulations? Because some synagogues have said, well, we'll do some things, but not other. We'll pray, but we won't say the Kedusha prayers like Baruch Hu and the Amidah. But then sometimes they say, but we will do Kaddish Yatom, the mourner's Kaddish, because that maybe we feel more urgent about, or maybe it's got more leniency to it. How do you deal with technical limitations? What about Shabbat and Yom Tov? Some of these questions are only about making a minyan. Is it different to have a Mariv on Thursday night versus meeting on a Shabbat evening? Is there anything that's actually better online? Meditation or learning? I just saw a New Yorker cartoon last night that has two people doing a yoga in front of a laptop computer. And it seems one says to the other, do you think it's buffering? Nobody could do a plank for this long. You know, they're like sort of holding a very uncomfortable position. And they think maybe the computer is broken because no teacher would make us do this for this long. But some things might be better. Meditation might be better, for instance, with fewer distractions. What do we do about decorum? And what about hybrid worship? As Rabbi Lubliner mentioned, I'm about to transition into a more of a strict education career. And I think everybody agrees that the best model for learning is in person. And the second best is everyone's remote. But the worst is hybrid, where you've got some people in the room and some people on the screen, and you're trying to attend to the needs of both. That's very hard. But is it possible? And then finally, the big question everyone wants to know, once this crisis is over, do we go back to how things were, or have we made some sort of permanent shift that we have to live with? So I'm just going to show you the next few slides, and then we're going to go out to breakouts. One, I'd like you to look at this slide, Model 1, the Zimun connection. Zimun is when we invite each other to say Birkat Hamazon, the blessing after a meal. It goes Rabotai Nevarech, and you're all supposed to answer. So that gives us one set of texts that have to do with constituting a minyan. What happens if you're like in a restaurant setting where you've got different tables and they're not even in great sight lines, but they can hear each other. Maybe some of them can see each other. Can they make a minyan? And is that relevant? Then model 2 is minyan through a window. What happens if somebody is standing outside a synagogue? Can they join, right? Then, so that's what I'm going to ask you to look at. Then we're going to come back together. I'm going to tell you about this cool rabbi you might not have heard much about, the Chida, Rabbi Chaim David Azulai, and Chaim Yosef David Azulai. And he made these great journeys around the Mediterranean, and we'll see how he dealt with a pandemic in his time, and some modifications to Jewish law that he made to accommodate the needs of that pandemic, right? And then we'll come to the end with questions, and then we'll go into general opening. So again, when we break you out, you're going to be looking at this slide, Model 1, and this slide, Model 2. If you have time and you want to go beyond that, you can, but you don't have to. And I'm going to now, because I was not able to upload that full PowerPoint, which is so pretty, I'm instead putting a Google Doc. It's not as pretty, but it has the same text in it. And so what time are we at now? It's 7:55. So I'm going to say take 20 minutes, and then around 8:15, that is, we'll come back together. And what you can do is, I think there's a way with breakout groups to summon me to your group. So if you want to do that, you can, and I will come visit your group and explain things. You can feel free to read in Hebrew if you can do that, but I'm assuming most of you will read in English, which is completely fine. And so take 20 minutes and look at those two slides, read the text, and ask yourselves, is this relevant to Zoom and other video platforms for prayer?
Okay, so I'm going to randomly divide folks into the breakout rooms, and we'll go from there. Let's do 5 rooms. Okay, here we go. Hedda, are you on? Right now you're on mute. I just want to, we're in breakout rooms and I would be happy to assign you to one.
Can you hear me?
I can.
I was
We're
watching.
doing we have a chavruta going so that there are different people in breakout rooms.
I know I was watching on my regular desktop computer that does not have a camera or sound. And when I realized we were going to do something, I left and I realized I had to turn off one computer to get on the other computer, but I'm here.
Okay, well, let me see if I'll put you in one of the groups.
Okay, I know most of the people on that group.
Let's see.
I really should go brush my hair first.
Or you can keep your camera off, I'd say. A lot of other people are. Let's see.
All I know is I loved when he said you can go to these Zoom prayer services in your pajamas, because I've attended Matt Berkowitz's sessions in my pajamas. Only once.
All right, I'm going to, you have a nice room with Marilyn Mass, Maury Safer, and Beth Shorty.
That's who I saw before.
Okay, well, I'm going to put you in there.
Did Roger mention that I'm the one that got him on there?
Yes, he did.
Let me
You'll
ask
see
you.
him shortly.
Well, I saw him before, but I couldn't talk to him.
Oh.
Did he mention? I know he was talking about Sabina Meyer when I got on.
Yes.
Have you ever heard of Tilly Reiser?
He didn't mention her, but I know the name.
He didn't know her. Sabina Meyer was Tilly Reiser's daughter.
Oh.
I started with one in preschool and ended with the other one my senior year in high school. Put me in a group and I'll leave you alone.
Okay, hold on one sec. He's in. Okay, you should be able to join. There we go.
Rabbi, we were supposed to leave.
Well, you'll be, you know, we'll terminate. I mean, the rooms will you're going to see in just a moment a countdown clock
Okay.
in any one of the rooms.
I couldn't resist hitting leave room, so
Okay.
it was nothing to do with the people in the room. We just
Okay. Well, people will. It's.
So I'm guilty, Lois. Yeah.
yeah, I see everybody. We're the rebellious group. There we go. Here's
Roger, Edda's on the call now, so you should see her shortly.
Hi, Maury.
Hi, Dad.
How about this technology? I have no idea what we just did.
Okay, that's good.
This is underscores the, I guess, the beauty and the frustration. For someone, for others, the other. Okay. All right, here we go. All right. Welcome back to everyone.
Okay, so I hope you had good conversations. And Rabbi Rosenblum, it's good to see you now. So I gave you those 2 slides, and I can screen share again, but maybe we'll just take a few general comments people have. The first one, to remind you, had to do with the sort of a restaurant setting. And in our group, I actually described something really happening in New York City right now. I don't know if any of you have been up in New York City lately or talked to anybody, but a lot of the restaurants, which have not obviously had indoor dining until recently, had sidewalk dining, even if they didn't normally have sidewalk dining. And then if they were, let's say, in front of Broadway, I live off of Broadway, they would just block off a couple of the parking spots that are normally in front of the restaurant, and they turned that into seating. So you were sitting on the street, which is kind of scary. And so they would build this like little shelter around you. There've been some accidents of cars hitting these restaurants, but mostly people have been doing this. But now imagine that you were a group of 12 friends who wanted to go out to a restaurant. You got to the restaurant, and as I said to my group, you didn't call in advance and say, we need a table for 12. So when you get there, the maitre d' says, I'm so sorry, but we don't have a table for 12 available. We've got a table for 6 on the sidewalk, another table of 6 on the street, right? And you say, okay, we'll be able to see each other, right? Except that on the sidewalk, there's also a passage where pedestrians are walking. You know, I'm walking home from work, right? And I'm on the sidewalk, and I see people to my right by the restaurant and people to my left on the street. So can you make a minion of the 6 people who are on the street and the 6 people on the sidewalk when there's a thoroughfare between them? So that's an example. We also saw in that first slide, the importance of intention. Can anybody explain why they think that's important? Intention? What the original intention in going to the restaurant was?
Well, I mean, if you're going to the place, we talked about it being a synagogue kiddush, and that is in 2 different rooms. If your intention is to join in beer cot with everybody else, then that we thought that's what it meant, that it's okay as long as there isn't like a road down the middle of the synagogue.
Good. Well said, Kim. Thank you. It is possible, Kim, that they also mean the intention before you even began eating, not just at the beginning of Birkat Hamazon. In other words, if all of us said we're going to a restaurant together, and then we got placed at different tables because they didn't have a table big enough for whatever we are, like 25 of us, about 25. So, but they put us in 3 tables. 3 tables with 8 or 9 people on them. Because we all wanted to go out to dinner together, our intention was to make a group. Let's say it was a wedding or a bar mitzvah or a kiddush. Even though you're at different tables, your intention always was to be one big group, which is different from if let's say I gave the example, 6 of us went out to dinner, and before we got around to benching, I noticed that the Goldbergs were down the hall in a different room, and they were having dinner with their friends. There were 6 of them. And I said, hey, Goldbergs, let's make a Zimun together. We'll make a minyan together. Our intention never had been, when we ate our meals, to be together. And so, according to that opinion, you could not make a minyan because you didn't have the intention, right? And in fact, it does happen this way. Like, let's say we were at the JTS cafeteria, God willing, in the future, people go back to the building and they're there. And Rabbi Lubliner comes, and I'm sitting at a table with a bunch of our friends, and there are 9 of us, and he comes and say, hey, Jonathan, come sit with us and make a mezumin. We're going to bench together. Or it's at Camper Mav Darom, let's say. And he says, because he knows his halacha, I'd love to, but I haven't eaten with you, and I wasn't part of your group. So we say to him, no worries, let's order you a drink. We're going to get you a dessert. You're going to eat some with us, and then you're part of the gang, and then you can actually count. So that is the idea. So I guess my question with this set of texts is, when you think about Zoom or other video platforms, don't have to give all the credit to Zoom, there are other platforms. Do you see any relevance of these texts that have to do with Zimun to Zoom? And do you think that these sort of help make the case for counting together, or perhaps raise doubts? Anyone?
That's a tough one.
It just seems like there's a couple of premises in this that have to hold true. One is the intentionality of people being together, eating together. And the other is whether they're eating the whole meal or whether they're just having a snack with the group. And then the other is that, as one of these slides talked about, was the importance of face-to-face contact.
Good. We'll get to that next. Yeah.
So if you can visualize the person and they share the same intention of being there, and you have shared some food together, then you can, and that all can apply to a Zoom platform, then I think you can make it work.
Good. So like, if, let's say you did a Passover Seder, and Michelle, you had, let's say, 4 people at your Seder, but you then connected to another household, cousins, kids, whatever it is, and then another one, you had 3 different Seders that were linked together, and you guys wanted to bench together. Okay? So you could say our intention from the outset was to have one Seder on screen together. And so therefore, perhaps the 3 groups that can see each other and have the intention of being together, right, might be able to form a group. Or you might say, but wait a second, it says here, if there's a thoroughfare between them, then they can't join together. Okay? Now that's just as what we call a yeshomrim. Some say you shouldn't do it, but it raises the question in the digital age, what is a separation? Is the fact that I'm in New York and that you're in Florida and someone else is in Michigan, and I think I heard somebody's in Boston, right? Is it really relevant? We're as much with each other as if you were all next door in the next house or the next room in the house. We're all sort of sharing this virtual space. Anybody else have a thought about that before we look at the other texts? I see your hand, Roger, I think. But you have to unmute. Yeah.
I'm interested in that we're talking about the prayer, which is obviously auditory, but it seems to be focused on sight.
Correct.
But I'm not sure that makes sense. The question I had when we were in our breakout room was, supposing that the group were in a room and lost power, so it's completely dark, they can't see each other, could they still proceed because someone remembers the words that are going to start the prayer.
Very nice. And Roger, as you recall, back in Adat Shalom, we had a congregant who was blind,
Yes.
Dr. Abe Nemeth, and of blessed memory. And I've got a student here, or had a student here. I think Rabbi Rosenblum was friends with her. She's now Rabbi Lauren Tuckman, and is blind. And they were able to participate in Zimun, even though they couldn't see each other. And yet you raised another issue, which is the auditory part. Like, what happens if you can see each other, but you can't hear each other? There is a statement in the Talmud that there was an enormous synagogue in ancient Alexandria. It was so big that people couldn't hear what was going on, and they didn't have microphones. So what they had was like a flashcard system, right? You know, they were like waving flags. And so when I finished saying, Baruch Hu et Adonai Barach, they would wave this, and everybody in the place would scream out Baruch Adonai Barach Le'olam Va'ed. So that was, they couldn't even hear, but they could sort of see. But most of the texts that have to do with minyan are assuming sight lines, right? Or if the people can't see each other, then someone can see them. And so I think that's relevant because, like, at the moment, about half of the group has their video off, right? Which is fine. We're not davening together. But you might say that you need to have at least 10 people on camera right now, which I think we are about to have. We're close to having it. But if we were going to daven Margaret right now, we might have to say, all right, we need to turn on one or two more screens so that we can see each other. And then the people who are not on screen, are not showing their faces, can be added to our minyan, but they can't themselves count in the minyan.
Well, so how does that work with, sorry for interrupting, but how does that work? Because I'm just imagining, like, at Passover this year, I emailed out copies of the Haggadah to my daughters who weren't here, and I emailed it out to my brothers, and we all did Seders together over Zoom. We had multiple iPads going so that we could see as many people as possible, but there were some people that you couldn't see over Zoom.
Right.
We could hear them, but we couldn't see them. So does that negate that we were joined, if we couldn't see each other?
So, one argument would be, Susan, that those people can be added on to the minyan. It's what the word is, tseruf leminyan. They're added onto the minyan, but they themselves can't constitute the minyan. They can't count toward the minyan. So, so therefore, you could say, well, we need at least 10 people in the family on visible to each other, and then other people who can't be on screen, they can still answer to the Birkat HaMazon, but they can't be counted. This is a theory. I'm not saying this is the settled law. It's just one model. So let's just take a minute now and look at that other text, because our time is flying and I want to share some other stuff with you. So the other one was minyan through a window, and we heard that there could be somebody standing outside the synagogue, and as long as they can hear and respond, and they can show their face, and the expression is mareh lehem panav, they show them their face, right? Then therefore they can be counted, right? It seems initially in that first part of Model 2 that anybody who's not in the room doesn't count, but then it gives this more liberal perspective, which is that as long as you can show your face. Okay? So it could be, and I think it's read this way, that it's saying, if you want to be counted in the minyan, you got to be in the room. If you can't be in the room, but there is a minyan in the room, then it's good enough to show your face. Right? So the question then becomes, can you go a little further with it than that? Right? So anybody have any questions before I go on to my next little text? Right, okay. So I'm going to give you a little history lesson now. Let's go back to this. All right, now we'll go here. All right, so this fella is a rabbi you may not have heard of, but he was an 18th century rabbi. He's known as the Chida, Rabbi Chaim Yosef David Azulai, and he was one of the great Sephardic rabbis of the modern era. He wrote a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch, and he also so he lived, if I can sort of point, if I can use this as a pointer here. I forget my skills, whether I'm allowed to use a pointer tool. Yeah, good. All right. Can you see a red dot now?
Yeah.
Good. All right. Aren't you impressed? All right. So he's got this diary. He was basically a schnorrer. Do you guys all know what a schnorrer is?
Yes.
Right, so he lived in this yeshiva in Jerusalem, and every couple of years he would go schnorring. He would go on a trip, and he would go down to Alexandria by donkey, and then he'd get on a boat in Alexandria, and he'd go to Italy, to Livorno, and then he'd go around Tuscany, come up to Venice, Ferrara, Venice, all these lovely towns. He'd go over the Alps into Switzerland, Germany, and then he would get all the way up here to the Low Countries, go over to England for a bit, come back to northern France, down to Provence, maybe a little bit along the Pyrenees, and then back on Lombardy and back to the boat ride. Right? On the way home, he might stop in Turkey, and then eventually get to the north and come down to Jerusalem. So that was his journey. And while he was traveling, he would go to town, like a scholar in residence, and he would teach a little Torah, and he would say, please give money to the poor of Israel, of Jerusalem. And this was called the Chalukah. For centuries this happened. And then when he came back, they had to distribute the money to all the different communities. Some of the bigger yeshivas would send their people out and do the same thing. In modern times, a place like the Jewish Theological Seminary might send a rabbi like Daniel Nevins to a place like Jacksonville or Detroit or Boston to give a talk and then hit everybody up for money. It's basically the same system, okay? But the thing that's interesting here is that when he gets on this very long leg of his journey here from Alexandria to Livorno, they used to do something called quarantine. Do you ever hear the word quarantine? I'm surprised you know it because it's not an English word. It's an old Venetian word, actually. It means 40, quarantine does. Right? And it's because when people would arrive from what we would today call the Middle East, they used to call it the Levant, they would have to quarantine for 40 days. So this is his diary, which is actually a manuscript at JTS, manuscript number 5388. He arrives from Alexandria to Livorno on the 23rd of Tammuz. Tammuz, you know, is in the summer, usually in July. Right? They arrive on the 23rd. On the 25th, they go down to the Lazzaretto. What's a Lazzaretto? Well, it's a type of quarantine station I wrote here, but it could be a hospital or a clinic. It seems to come from the word Lazarus, who you may know is a New Testament figure who was like this guy who died and Jesus resurrects him. So it's called the Lazzaretto, right? And it says, on Rosh Chodesh Elul, we entered Livorno. So wait a second. They came the last week of Tammuz, and they spent the whole month of Av, which is in the middle. And then in the beginning of Elul, about 40 days later, they entered the town. So they did something like a quarantine. Right? This, by the way, is a little detective work Danny Nevins did. I hope you appreciate it because it's going to help us understand this next little text that we look at. Let's see if I can go ahead. All right, so I'm actually just going to read a little bit of in the Hebrew so that you hear that word. B'latzareto shenoagim ba'arim ha'el im yesh shte kitot sham she'inam yicholim ligaz ze bazeh ויש שישה בבית אחד וארבעה בבית אחר, והם חלוקים במספרם כמשפט. שמעתי מרב אחד אוהבינו, I forget this is something, anyway, means may his Torah guard him. שנסתפק הן בעודנו שם, אם הדלת יכולים להיות Lifnei Petach Habayit V'yitzterfu l'Asra. So I'm going to explain now. In our lands, there's this custom of the Lazzaretto, the quarantine house. If there are two groups that are not permitted to contact one another, 6 in one house and 4 in the other, and they're divided by law. Now, I just want to point out that they're divided by law. In Hebrew, it's Chalukim b'misparam kamishpat. So what's going on? A first party arrived in the port of Livorno, and they were put in one quarantine house, like a hut. And then the next group came and they got put in a different hut so that the authorities would keep track of how many days they were in quarantine for. So I heard from one rabbi, a friend of ours, may God protect him, that while they are there, if the 4 could gather by the entrance to their house, since they can see each other, could they join together to form a minyan or not? In other words, you got 4 people in the doorway of one house and 6 people in the doorway of the other house. They're not in the same room, but they see each other. He says, in my inexpert opinion, he's being humble, it seems that they could join together. For after all, they're not allowed to gather together, and there is a guard in the field before the entrance. This is a serious deal. This is like a serious quarantine, not like a USA quarantine, but like the way Israel was doing quarantines, where you arrived at Ben Gurion, you got a COVID test, and then you were taken by the public authorities to a hotel where you were locked in your room, and they brought you food, but you were definitely not allowed out of your room, right? So he says, and there's no room for them to step outside, and it's a public thoroughfare, which goes back to what the Shulchan Aruch said. In such a case, they are not allowed to gather together by decree of the king and the public officials. And these 4 have tried to gather by the entrance to show them their faces, which is like what the Talmud said about showing your face through a window and joining a minyan. This is a similar case, he says, and more so because it's absolutely impossible for them to be together or even to come close. And since there are several authorities who permit joining separate groups to make a minyan, we should rely on them so that 40 days, the quarantine, will not be wasted with no public prayer, and they won't hear Kaddish and Kedusha. And we have also written about a man standing in a veranda or in the women's gallery. As long as he tries to come down a bit closer to the gathering below and can show them his face, we can rely for precedent to join them, and all the more so in this case. I'm going to stop the screen share so I can see your faces, those of you who are sharing them. And so I think this is fascinating. And this was something I was very excited to discover this. And because it's evidence that a rabbi in the pre-modern era or the early modern era was exposed to the same concept of quarantine, the same idea that it was unsafe and illegal to gather together indoors in mixing groups together. And he said, well, can we piece together different leniencies? Because I don't know if you noticed, but he was actually piecing together different leniencies. He took the first set of texts we looked at have to do with Zimun, which is that if some people see each other, but they don't all necessarily see each other. And then the other one, that they could make a minyan even if it's 4 in one room and 6 in another. So he borrowed that idea from the Birkat Hamazon context. And then the idea of showing your face, he borrowed from the context of the guy standing outdoors and looking in. And he combined those texts together and created a new leniency to say that 2 different groups of Jews in 2 different houses who are able to see each other can somehow make a minyan. And it was on that basis that we at JTS anyway allowed for people to say the Kedusha prayers, because as he said, it would be sad to go 40 days of quarantine and not have the chance to hear Kaddish and Kedusha and only say prayers like as an individual and not to sanctify God's name as a group. So I'm curious what people think about the Chidah and whether that's a interesting precedent for us to use as well in this pandemic. Okay, I see Roger's hand. Good. And then if anyone else wants to come in after Roger, please do. Go ahead, Roger.
It seems in this sense we're talking to a certain extent about the difference between minhag and halakha, in that halakha is often more in the abstract and will leave gaps. There'll be interstitial space, and we fill those with custom, and that the custom can be more malleable in the face of serious necessity imposed, in this case, by the ruling authorities. And I think of another example that corresponds to this kind of necessity. I'm not sure it's in every Haggadah, but there's the incident of the inmates of Bergen-Belsen in 1943 who had no matzah. And the rabbi said, do the prayer which says, behold, Lord, you know we wish we had matzah. We do not. We only have this. Nonetheless, you know our hearts.
Right. It's a very powerful story. So you used the word at the beginning, Roger, minhag, and minhag means custom. And it, as you said, it sort of fills in the gaps between the halachic record, the sort of legal record, and it's a bit more malleable, I think you said, which is all true. Of course, the halakha itself is also malleable because it has sort of prioritization schemes for when different values are in conflict. So, for example, health is a value. And so if it's dangerous to be together, you might say that halachically you can't make a minyan with fewer than 10 people in the same room, like the Shulchan Aruch says. But then if there's a health danger, then maybe at that point you start to say, well, then we're definitely not allowed to be together because you can't endanger people's lives for the sake of a minyan. But on the other hand, can you make the minyan? And so the answer seems to be that he found a way in this sort of emergency situation. But what's the question then becomes, when is the emergency over? So
can I just also throw something in to Rabbi Nevins? And what the Chidah is suggesting is also in a place where this community in the Lazzaretto is not a true community. It's a makeshift community by virtue of people being thrown together in a setting where everybody's stuck in quarantine. What would happen if and we don't know from the Chidah, but for us who need to make decisions today, if you have to also think about the ramifications in more permanent communities, where in quarantine you might not be able to join together, but you're also concerned about the ramifications in those permanent communities of what might transpire. It's a segue into your next question. What might transpire? The people in Lazzaretto were there temporarily. They were going to leave no matter what. But in an established community where you resort to some device to bring people together so as to do something that would normally be Dvarim Sheb Kedusha, those things that require a minyan, you wonder how concern about the after effects might also limit what you do even during the quarantine.
Right. So I think you made a very good point there that the Lazzaretto, nobody really expected to stay there very long. Nobody wanted to be there. And they were just travelers. And, a lot of us, I think when we go traveling around the world, when we used to do that, would sort of gravitate towards fellow Jews and, go to visit the synagogue or, hear people talking some Hebrew, they're Israelis, and sort of play our Jewish geography or whatever. So I'm sure they created a sense of community, but if they were allowed to make a minyan, ala chad kama v'kama, how much more so a permanent community like the Jacksonville Jewish Center, which has never missed a Shabbat being together probably for decades and decades, and now suddenly is forced apart by this emergency. And so you can say, if it worked in that case, how much more so should it work in this case? But then there's a flip side to it too. And I think that's what you were getting at, which is that Now that you've allowed this sort of virtual constitution of a community, right, have we actually undermined part of the raison d'etre of having a community, of having a building, of having, a maintenance staff, having offices, having all the things that go with the expenses and difficulties that go with having a physical space? And have we removed the motivation for people to come to synagogue, right? Have people gotten used to the idea that they can participate fully without, missing out on other things that they would have been doing in their life? And okay, the person in the nursing home, okay, the person whose flight was canceled, okay, the person who, is immunosuppressed and can't be in crowds. We get all them. But what about the people who don't have all those reasons? They just, would rather not come to synagogue that day. Are we going to insist that they actually have to come to synagogue in order to participate? Can we do that when there are so many other online options out there that are freely available? All right, so I see Kim has got her hand up, so I want to hear from you. And then anybody else who wants to raise their virtual or physical hand can do that too.
Thank you. Well, I had a different comment, but then what you were just saying also made me think of something else. I think, the question is, for having a hybrid, you'll have fewer people in person. I feel the question is that would the person not come at all if it were not for the virtual service? So that's like one factor. Maybe they're not feeling well, so they wouldn't go in person, but if you have an online option available, they will attend. So this is when it's not the case where somebody's going to attend online who's perfectly capable of going in person. Mm-hmm. But I'm talking about the opposite, and I don't have an answer for that. But my original question was, surely this schnorr was not the first or last, and that there were other pandemics and Jews all over the world in different situations. I'm just wondering what other commentary there has been on this subject.
It's a good question. I have not seen other travelogues like this that raise this halachic issue. There are some famous Jewish travelogues. There was a guy named Benjamin of Tudela, for example, a very famous medieval Spanish rabbi who traveled, sort of our Marco Polo. But I don't know that I've seen other halachic discussions of quarantine. So this was a new one for me. This text was then discussed by later rabbis that are found in our Mishnah Berurah, but so that's how I found this. But I don't know anything more than that, Kim. So I see Susan's hand is up, and I call on her.
Yeah, so it kind of goes to part of the discussion we ended at the breakouts with, I know with my job, like I travel all over the world pre-COVID, right? And because I was on the road so much, what I always missed traveling was, wow, I couldn't be in Jacksonville, never mind anything else. And the power of being able to participate in services regardless of where you are, to be with the people that you care about and that that you have a network with. It's so wonderful that it's actually something that I know that when it's time for me to start traveling again, I'm going to miss it. Because it's been so wonderful being able to stay connected and go to services and stuff. And then even, and it's a different kind of a separation though, because, like if I look at my work day takes me to the very edge of when you need to be at services. Versus now I can turn on Zoom and I can be there right on time when the service starts, versus, oh wait, now I got to jump in the car and it's going to take me half an hour. And by the time I get there, when I had to close out that last meeting, I can't get there in time. So it's an enabler. And so I wonder about that.
Right, as do we all. I mean, it has been very convenient to participate in this way. And let's be honest, I'm enjoying teaching you tonight. but I'm glad that tomorrow night I get to have dinner with my family, and actually my students invited me to their house for dinner, and so I'm gonna get to be with them, and then I'll see you again on Sunday night, and then, and it's very convenient. I think we all understand that we are losing something at the same time, and that I think I worry at least about the depth of relationships, and that we don't form as deep a relationship with people online as we might. And I could be wrong. I mean, I think there are examples where people have very deep relationships with people they only know online. I know that. Still, the type of relationship that would sustain a synagogue and that would build a structure that would have hundreds of people or thousands of people to organize their lives around it, to raise their children there, to come back to. It seems to me harder to imagine that can be created entirely virtually. So I see Susan's got her hand up. So you're on.
Okay, so what Susan, the other Susan, mentioned made me think of what the conservative movement did when communities started moving out of city centers into suburbs.
Yes.
And there's a response that allowed that you could now then drive to synagogue. And but what it did was enable people who had the intention to come to services, that if they did not live close enough, they could, it would enable them to be able to attend. And I guess it made me think that Zoom and these other platforms are similar in that they are enabling now during the pandemic, but perhaps even after the pandemic, especially for those who didn't have that platform before, the elderly who can't, or the immobile or what have you, people who travel.
Susan, thank you. And I agree with you. They are similar. And others have also felt that this is kind of a 1950s driving tshuva moment, where there was perhaps something that wasn't the ideal for anyone. Nobody really liked the idea of getting on the highway and driving to synagogue, and it actually was in the Detroit suburbs where the first Northland Mall, I recall, was built, and Jews started moving out of the neighborhoods in the city of Detroit to the first rung suburbs and to Southfield and all that, and they were further apart. And the rabbis said, well, if we don't tell them that they can come to synagogue, they'll just go golf or go to the mall, and they won't come to synagogue. And so I get it. But let me push back for a second, Susan, and you can push back on my pushback here, okay? Some would say that Orthodoxy actually, by sort of being forced to differentiate itself from the other Jewish communities, and forcing, when other synagogues became large with 1,000 families and vast halls and everything, the Orthodox maintained small neighborhood synagogues, shtibuch, and also full synagogues, but smaller. But they were tightly knit to their communities. That allowed them to sort of do some work of building community and having a norm of sort of people walking to the park together, people inviting each other to meals, people stopping by each other's homes, which those of us who drive don't always do. I don't always say, oh, I'm in the neighborhood where so-and-so lives, I'm going to stop by and knock on their door. But in a walking community, you do have a bit of that. And I think that in this pandemic, again, there's been a differentiation where most non-Orthodox synagogues quickly shifted to online, and most Orthodox synagogues and some conservative synagogues sort of made a point of, nope, we're only doing it in person. So if we have to daven outside, we daven outside. If they daven with masks, we daven with masks. We can daven with plexiglass, we'll do that, because this is how Jews gather. And, it's been an interesting thing. When they couldn't have a minyan, I actually heard from some Haredi Jews that the big differentiation between men and women in the Orthodox world is that men count in the minyan and women don't count in the minyan. Well, if you couldn't constitute a minyan anyway, then it kind of equalized men and women because nobody really was part of a minyan unless they were physically together outside. And then it was no longer so obvious why the mom needed to stay home and do the dishes while dad got to go out to shul and to the kollel or whatever. And so it's shifted some of their gender dynamics a little bit. But I do think that a lot of synagogues that maintain like a tighter policy about not meeting over online are now in the moment of bounce back. So they're very proud of what they did, and they're more clear about what they think counts. We got through COVID and we still didn't, make minyan on Zoom, and so therefore we really know who we are. And I'm not justifying them or saying they did it right, but I think those of us who've done hybrids, who have allowed for some minyan online, have this presenting question. Do we go back, or has that bridge been crossed and we have to just move ahead? And we are forever more going to be a mix of people who are in person and people who are online, and that's okay. Let's just embrace the blessings of that and not worry too much about it. Okay, I want to see, Rabbi Lubliner, do you want to say anything? Because we're in our final minutes, and this has a lot of implications for you and for Rabbi Rosenblum and your community. I'm curious how it feels to you guys as clergy at Jacksonville Jewish Center, and what are the blessings and opportunities, and what are the challenges that you see?
Well, it's not as if, we never talk about this, except almost every day, and at length. Throughout the, we went through a period of evolution as well, when we weren't having anybody in the building, to having small minyanim, to people masked and socially distant, to now being open. We truly are a hybrid, because, and some of it is dependent on when we can have the cultural patterns of the community. There's no halachic rhyme or reason other than this is our balabatim. So we have a morning minyan that is on Zoom only. We have an evening minyan that's on Zoom and in person. Shabbat morning, we're live streaming from the sanctuary. It's all set up automatically. But Kabbalat Shabbat and Mincha, Mariv, and Shabbat are Zoom. And we leave. We have a Shabbat link that we activate before Shabbat, and leave it on throughout. I would say, looking at this from my perspective, and we've only done Kaddish Yatom, with a virtual minyan. When we are, in person and on Zoom, we will have a minyan present. My concern has always been, well, number one, go back to some of the sources, the intentionality. There are people who, are wearing their PJs or whatever, and they don't want to be seen for valid reasons. It's not for me to, there are other people I know, nobody here, I want to be very clear, who may turn off their screen because this is background music. They like our Chazan, Kabbalat Shabbat. It's very lively. They're cleaning, they're cooking, they're folding the laundry, which then, certainly presents a question with intentionality. Are they, focused? We would never have somebody who would, come and bring their laundry to fold in shul, or, drape themselves in a sheet so congregants couldn't see them. And there have even been a few times, again, nobody present, who I suspect they thought they were doing us a favor by just like logging in and going to get dressed, for morning minyan. When we speak to them, they don't unmute, but nobody wants to embarrass anybody else. And and of course, even the issue is Zoom, not streaming, with sound that is never synced quite right, and then you have to do so. As Marada Atra, I didn't want to get into a place. I felt that saying Kaddish Yatom was a matter of personal chiyuv in a way. And, you know, the fact that it's not mentioned in the list of other things, Dvarim Sheb Kedusha, I mean, I suppose it's a rationalization, but that seemed an urgent need for congregants to be able to say Kaddish. But to go whole hog, full-fledged, and, you know, say that 10 people online is a minyan, I saw it as presenting problems both in the here and now with people who are not necessarily there, even though their computers say that they're there, or they're there and they're just, you know, listening in the background. And for the future, when we're already encountering challenges of getting people to commit to coming back in person to have a minyan in the traditional sense. So that was some of the reasoning, and I really don't know what the future will be. I wish it were as simple as just live streaming, which would make it very simple. Everything is in person, and that everybody else can look in through the window, and we are a real community. And if you are outside 1,000 miles away looking in, you can, you know, be mitzdaref, and you can join our minyan. Zoom and other platforms that allow that interactive ability to some extent, you know, that's a huge question. I don't know if Rabbi Rosenblum wants to add anything.
I will just say that I have really appreciated the opportunity to learn this evening. It's been nice to be with people I know, people I don't, and learning text, which is something I don't get to do that often, and to be with my teacher. And it's nice to see you, Rabbi Nevins, and I'm looking forward to Sunday evening. I think that the question that we had earlier that we never really got to of can hybrid be still meaningful, or what ways can you make hybrid work for the most number of people, is something we didn't really ever get to. And we have hybrid in some of our services, and I don't know that I would say that they're perfect, but they seem to work for the things that they're being used for. But that's definitely a conversation that I think would be interesting to continue to have when we're not past our time. But thank you.
You're very welcome. And you saw in the handout that I made, I had some closing sort of cover note or thoughts, and one of them was just showing up and really being present. And I think, you know, what Rabbi Lubliner was saying about, you know, when you're in shul, be in shul. And if you can't physically be there, okay, but you know, resist the temptation, whether it's doing the laundry or reading your email at the same time. I mean, look, let's be honest, even in real shul, we don't always have 100% of our attention on what's going on in the bima. I hate to break the news, but I've always suspected that might be the case. But that's okay. Like we all accept that and live with a little bit, you know, that people are going to schmooze a little bit. But still, when it gets to be distracting and undermines the emotions that people are trying to develop, then we try to put a stop to it. So I guess there's always going to be that negotiation to make Zoom tefillah meaningful. So I'm going to finish up, but I'm going to let you all go to your evenings, but I look forward to seeing you on Sunday night, and I wish you all Shabbat Shalom. And thank you so much for this invitation.
Thank
Want
you.
to
Shabbat Shalom.
Thank
say
you.
thank you to
Thank you,
Rabbi
Rabbi.
Nevins. Just a quick thank you as well to Yaakov Feg, our director, our chair of Congregational Learning.
Thank you.
And to all the members of the Committee on Congregational Learning. Sunday at 7:30, Rabbi Nevins will be talking about
Rabbi.
Jewish Law and Human Dignity. And that will be at 7:30. And then Monday, the future of a movement on where we are going as conservative Jews, Masorti Jews, and look forward to that conversation as well. So Shabbat Shalom. Thank you, Rabbi Nevins.
You're very welcome.
See you soon.
Bye, everyone. Shabbos.
Right.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Rabbi,
Shabbat shalom.
so when have you moved to Livingston yet?
We've not moved to New Jersey yet, and I'm
Okay.
not sure when we do, whether it would be Livingston or a different town, but
Oh, okay. No, I'm just asking because I know one of the students at your future school, Alana Werwa, is
Okay.
there.
Ah,
So maybe I don't know if it's okay. She used to be a member of this congregation. Maybe I
I
could send her the
forgot who
link.
was over there.
But yeah, well, Griff is graduating from the school, this Goldock now, and he will be at Brandeis.
Great.
So Evan and Griff will be in the same city again. Yay! Our sons are best friends, and they both just
There you go.
graduated. So
Anyway,
Alana now.
we'll
Yeah, so
let Rabbi
Alana's still
Nevins
at the
go, and
yeah.
oh
Yeah, I
Shabbat Shalom and
didn't want to
Lila Tov.
hold anybody up. I just wanted to catch
Bye,
them.
everyone. Good
Okay.
night.
Shabbat
Good
shalom.
night.
Bye.
Bye, shalom.
Shalom.
Night,
Thank
everyone.
you.